This is Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan. Welcome, everybody. In this Back to School special episode, we are going to do a debate about TikTok in the classroom. TikTok, of course, is the social media app that comes from China and that has made a considerable impression around the world, especially on youth, and that includes American youth. People post videos, usually very, very short videos, on an extraordinary range of matters, from food to finance to fashion, from daring feats to dumb pranks to political rants, and sometimes on serious matters related to science or history or health. Now, in that last group, there is some stuff that some school teachers in particular have recognized as actually informative, like little videos on chemistry experiments, legitimate chemistry experiments. And more teachers are actually importing these TikTok moments into their curricula because they say they add something to what's already happening in the classroom itself. This debate is about whether that's a good idea, because in a lot of ways, a lot of people are concerned about TikTok. They say that it's distracting, it's addictive, and in so many ways it's problematic. Not to mention, there are other ways to teach, better ways, maybe, or maybe not. That's the divide we are debating across in this episode around this question. TikTok in the classroom, enhancing or eroding the teaching profession. Let's meet our debaters. Arguing that TikTok is enhancing the teaching profession, I want to welcome Phil Cook. Phil is an education influencer and a high school chemistry teacher. He's also a popular TikTok creator himself, sharing his chemistry demonstrations with millions online. Phil, welcome to Open to Debate.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. It's great to have you here. And here to argue that TikTok in the classroom is doing the opposite, is eroding the teaching profession, I want to welcome Adrian Dingle. Adrian is a secondary school teacher and education consultant, again, with a focus on chemistry. He is the author of several award-winning chemistry books. Adrian, welcome to you as well to Open to Debate.
Thanks, John. Glad to be here.
I just want to mention this debate is of particular interest to me, given that you were both chemistry teachers. My grandfather on my father's side was a biology high school teacher. And then his two children, my father and my aunt, became public school teachers. And then my father married somebody who is a public school teacher. And my brother and sister, their offspring, also became teachers. So I'm the only non-teacher in the family, but I have some sense for the profession and the culture and what it's like to have this as a career. So I'm very, very interested in having the two of you tell me just very, very briefly. I'll start with you, Adrian. What's your teaching experience?
I've got, this will be my 36th year coming up, starting tomorrow, 10 years in the UK and 25 years in the US. All in secondary chemistry education. That's my field. That's my speciality, and mostly in the private sector, but some in the public sector as well. So
that's a lot of years. A lot of years.
It is a lot of years. It is.
Phil, how about you?
I've, like Adrian, have been teaching for a while, not nearly as long, though. I've got about 25 years of education under my belt. I've taught in public and private schools. I started out in Chicago public schools, and I most recently have been teaching at a private boarding school in Indiana. I've always been a chemistry teacher. I've also gone in some jaunts teaching engineering and some physics as well.
All right, so that's more than half a century of teaching experience. So that's a good basis for us to be having this conversation. So we want to ask each of you to make your opening statements, and that's where you have the space uninterrupted to tell us why you're arguing on the side of this argument that you are. Phil, you're up first, and you are saying that TikTok is enhancing the teaching profession. Here's your chance, please, to tell us why.
Yes, I am going to be arguing in the affirmative that TikTok is enhancing to the classroom. A couple of things to keep in mind, though. Any tool in and of itself is only as good as how it's implemented. And one of the key strengths of being able to use TikTok is for the purposes of microlearning. So microlearning means that we set specific small goals and create content that is strategically aligned to that. If we're using a tool like TikTok in the classroom to help us meet our course goals, then I think that that's a way that's going to enhance the classroom and the learning of the students within that class. Another thing to consider is that short form video is kind of how our students learn now. They're used to having little bite-sized nuggets of information, and using short form video platforms like TikTok is a way that enhances our ability as communicators to our students, not only just in the classroom, but also outside the classroom, because you can create the content and they can consume it outside of the time that they might be in front of you. And it also allows us to kind of distill what matters most. And one of the things that we know about digital and multimedia learning is the more concise that we can be, the more effective the instruction will be. We cut away all of the fluff and get down to what are the course goals that we need to meet, what's the singular objective that this video can attain, and then we design curriculum and the video that goes along with it to meet that particular goal. Another thing that I've seen TikTok actually be beneficial for in the classroom is for allowing more active engagement. Within a classroom, you might have students who are quite extroverted, and you also might have a cohort that's more introverted. Well, when you have a tool like TikTok or any kind of short form video platform with the set goals that help you meet your objectives in the classroom, that is a level playing field where students are able to create on their own. They can show their face, they can not show their face, they can take a creative approach that they might not have otherwise been able to do to convey the challenge that the teacher has for them. And one of the things for me as a chemistry teacher that's been most useful is TikTok allows me to kind of condense demonstrations. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we do in science requires a lot of preparation, costly materials, and a safe space to use in order to conduct those experiments. Chemistry, you don't have to do a lot of searching online to find out that there have been situations where teachers have tried to demonstrate relatively dangerous experiments with bad consequences, students getting hurt. This platform allows you to kind of remove that consideration where you can do something and it's completely safe. You can show students something that not only can they see it in the classroom, you can pause the video, you can ask them engaging questions about what are you seeing, what do you think is happening? And that's something that might be lost in an experiment where it lasts for a second and then it's gone. You can't backtrack and rewind it, but with TikTok you can. Students can replay it as many times as they need to. And the other thing is that when we are thinking about TikTok as a utilitarian piece of equipment in our classroom, we have to remember that it's all about how we structure its use. If you take a tool and use it poorly, you will get poor results. But if you take a tool like TikTok or any other short video platform and you try and create an experience where students are actively engaged, allowed curiosity to kind of convey their understanding, I think you end up with a deeper understanding of what the student knows and what they may not know, and also give them a means to present their knowledge in a format that best suits them.
Okay, Phil, thank you very much. And Adrian, you disagree. You believe TikTok is eroding the teaching profession. Here, please, is your chance to tell us why.
Okay, well, I'd like to present 6 quick arguments which back up that position. The first one I'm really concerned about is the lack of gravitas. I don't suppose that anyone is arguing that TikTok or indeed any social media channel is providing the conditions and the environment that will lead to serious discussion of intellectual ideas. But the fact that they are so shallow, I think, is a real problem. Social media in general, TikTok as well, as you mentioned, John, at the beginning, often offers the opposite of dignity and decorum. And in modern classrooms with today's students, we are really struggling with that. And I think that anything which somehow backs up the idea that many kids have that influencers hold the keys to their futures is not really a good thing. We need methodologies that bring seriousness back into the classroom, and I don't think TikTok is that kind of thing. Secondly, the content offers misleading ideas regarding what subjects really are. Over the years, I've encountered numerous instances where children express their love of chemistry or science, but what they're really saying is, I love watching Bill Nye the Science Guy's demonstration on late night talk shows, or maybe I like to create red cabbage indicators in homeschool environments. And the parents will often say things like, well, of course, they've always enjoyed and excelled in science, and in fact, they've got no idea what's going to happen when they come into the classroom. And when I start asking them to do things with algebra, and I ask them to sit down and be quiet and listen to me, these are problems. And I think titillation and learning are two very, very different things. And we've got to get back to the idea that academic things are serious. They're seldom fun, or at least not in the conventional sense of the word. And I think when we really understand that fun in the classroom is ultimately found in the satisfaction of intellectual pursuit and understanding that from a rigorous point of view, I think that helps us a lot. And I think TikTok has the potential to erode some of that because of the ways that the kids are, exposed to it in other areas. Number 3 is avoiding the struggle. All meaningful, lasting, deep learning only comes from long-term, rigorous engagement with the material. The struggle is where the learning happens. And if somebody has filtered that out to allow the watcher to avoid the struggle, somebody else has distilled that information, that involvement with the material, I think, can be very superficial and often reduced to a point that is incredibly unhelpful. 4th thing is fragmentation. And what I mean by that is, just like being immersed in the material, fragmentation of the material into small sound bites gives the kids snippets of information, but it doesn't give them anything that approaches comprehensive coverage. And I think the fragmentation has the potential to get kids into a Dunning-Kruger effect where 30 seconds of fun or 30 seconds of interest gives them perhaps the idea inappropriately that they are comfortable about a topic and they understand it. And it's way, way, way more complex than that. 5th one is on TikTok. Of course, present company accepted. There's a lot of very poor material there. It's not produced by people who are experts in the field, and it's all to do with flashes and bangs and other eye-catching content, which really isn't anything to do with what we're doing. 6th and final thing is the classic red herring of engagement. Engagement is always, always, always the responsibility of the student. Always. And I think any inappropriate shift away from that and towards the teacher being a performer or of a purveyor of edutainment is a very damaging thing for education.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I want to ask each of you to take 30 seconds to tell me what you think your opponent is actually arguing. Paul, you're up first. What did you hear Adrian say as a critique of TikTok in the classroom?
So I did my best to well, first of all, Adrian and I know each other. We've worked together before. So I come with a little bit of knowledge about my friend's perception of things. And so it wasn't surprising what I heard. What I heard him say was that there's fundamentally a lack of gravitas in the content that's produced on TikTok. And actually, even when you're very focused and thoughtful about it, it still comes across as pretty shallow.
Adrian, how about you? What did you hear from Paul, from Phil?
Well, I think that he said that, like every single tool that any teacher has ever had in the classroom, its incorrect implementation is going to be problematic. And that's true of, it doesn't matter, if we go back to, slates and chalk, sometimes that's inappropriate. Sometimes it's inappropriate to use the whiteboard. Sometimes it's inappropriate to use the video. And it really depends. The expertise is always going to lie in the hands of the person in the classroom.
Also good listening on your end. What I heard each of you say, I heard Phil say that kids, that I found interesting, kids are used to this short form. It's their language, it's their vocabulary now. And it's also a way to reach them when they are not in the classroom because they're on TikTok and they like the format. He also says it's a way to be very, very concise, very efficient with information. And in an interesting way, he said for kids who are less extroverted, creating content is also a way for them to be engaged. And another point I did not expect to hear, Phil, you made the argument that these experiments can be dangerous. And I guess you're saying blow up in the classroom. You can get it worked out on a video first and everybody's safe. And then I'm hearing from Adrian this idea that the classroom needs to be dignified and have a sense of gravitas. And there's just something about TikTok that fights against that makes it unserious. And also, and you captured this, I think, Phil, in your recitation of what you heard Adrian say, there's something misleading about giving the idea that, okay, I've watched this video, now I know the subject and I've got it comprehensively. And people may think that they understand what it is when they only know a tiny, tiny piece of it. And finally, Adrian, I hear you making an argument that the classroom is a serious place. It's not always going to be fun. That entertainment is not the teacher's role. And I want to take that as our starting point. Back to you, Phil. There's no question that your videos are one of the things they are is entertaining. How do you feel about Adrian's critique that entertainment is not part of the mission of a teacher?
I don't disagree with him completely on that point, because I'm not there as like a court jester to come into class and entertain everyone and have them be riveted to their seats because of the way that I might be presenting a piece of material. But what I am charged with is clearly communicating the content that I expect them to know by the time they leave my classroom. I expect them to be able to explain it deeply. If that's a question that I ask them, they should be able to answer it. If I need them to focus and hold their attention, they should be able to do that. My argument is that TikTok can be very enhancing in that regard, because I can use structured, focused work that I do preeminently ahead of time to help students kind of get a little bit of the ball rolling before they even come to the classroom. If you imagine, if one of the most anecdotal things I guess that comes to mind right now is I often would make videos on a particular concept. I'd post them, and then knowing my students would watch them, wait till they come into class and the questions that they would ask. And those questions, for me, even though they weren't necessarily for course goals, in that particular example, they still resulted in kids coming to class curious. And one of the things that I can say unequivocally that happens through the content I've created on social media is that it generates a curiosity to know more. And I'm very deliberate about telling students how much time it takes me to think about the words I say, to think about how I present the material, to cut it down into a concise manner, so that there's no illusions about what the process is behind the scenes, even though they're watching a polished product that lasts 25 to 38 seconds.
Adrian, I found interesting the notion in Phil's answer that it's a spur to curiosity, and that's always a good thing.
I don't think it's a bad thing. And again, Phil and I probably have some overlap. There's a Venn diagram where we do agree here. All I would say is the question becomes, what is teaching? Is it my job to reach every child? I think that's a myth about teaching, which is totally incorrect and always has been. There will be some kids who don't like chemistry. There will be some kids who leave with very limited knowledge. And that's okay. It's not the idea that we're going to reach everybody and it's really important to reach everybody is it's a myth, always has been. And I think, people will often say, well, we need an informed electorate, or we need an educated electorate so they can make decisions. And I'm afraid I have a very cynical view about that. I think most kids ultimately will grow up and vote with their pocketbook, or what their parents tell them, or what their pastor tells them. And I think this idea that we have an informed electorate that's going to vote knowing the science is absolutely hilarious. And I think there's a lot of proof to suggest that that isn't true and it isn't working. So I'm okay with not reaching some of those kids. That's just the way it is. Not everybody's going to like chemistry, and that's okay.
Wow. So we're not actually debating the question of whether it's a teacher's role to reach all the kids, but I think this is an interesting side path I'd like to go down a little bit, because Phil, your argument for TikTok, for using this technology, is to engage as many kids as possible. So let's take a little side trip on the sort of philosophical issue that Adrian has raised.
Sure. I can speak to kind of my response as I was listening to Adrian present his viewpoint. And for me, I realize very much like Adrian that you're not going to be able to reach every kid the same way. My goal as a teacher has always been, how far can I bring a student up? How far can I make them more knowledgeable than where they were before? For some kids, that might be quite a large amount that they're able to grow as a result of being a member of my class. Other times, it's much smaller. And it's definitely frustrating when you don't reach kids, for me personally, because I love seeing the look on their face when they get excited about something. Because honestly, a lot of students come into the classroom, probably a lot of the way that their parents may have left a chemistry classroom disenchanted. They didn't have a lot of fun. And not that we have to entertain them again, but the idea that you can help them understand that this can be really, really just like magical almost. This can be a great way to kind of learn how the world works around you. And the way that I tend to look at it is, okay, however much you grow in my class, That's great. I'll push you. I'll hold you to high standards. What you do afterwards is up to you. The way that you grow in a class is always up to the student. It's always the responsibility of the student to stay engaged, to do their best. A teacher can only do so much in that regard. I think that's probably something that Adrian would agree with.
Absolutely. Kids, I think every kid that leaves my classroom has grown. They just may not. It's possible that they may have grown in the way they weren't expecting, i.e. that they had to put up with something that they didn't necessarily enjoy, and it was something that they had to be disciplined in order to do. So, whether we're talking about, we're getting into a more philosophical thing here, whether we're talking about the subject and the material or the content, or the way that kids are growing in different ways. So my argument would probably be, it's really not that important that, half of these kids understand the chemistry. That really isn't going to matter to them. What might be more important is they learn to sit down, shut up, and listen to an expert, and actually engage in a way that they might not want to, and that isn't entertaining. So I think that's a form of growth in itself. And as long as Phil is down the hallway from me, and they get exposed to a whole bunch of teachers, I think we all do a collective job here together.
One critique that that Adrian did not bring up about TikTok, he mentioned that it's unserious, that it's so often recreational, and that he doesn't feel that it has a place in the classroom. One set of critiques he didn't bring is the research and so also this anecdotal sense we all have that TikTok is is having a terrible impact on attention spans of kids, and that it's addictive, that it's that some folks would say in an ideal world, young children and teenagers are not spending their time staring at a phone. And the more time they're on a phone, the more harm is done to them. And you're right in that world where you are creating content that is meant to be appealing. So can you take on that critique? And I then want to bring it back to Adrian and ask if that's also part of his concern about TikTok in the classroom.
Sure. There's no doubt that looking at a screen for hours and hours every day is detrimental. There's no doubt that the experience of many students, especially high school age students who maybe were in middle school when COVID was underway, have had a lot more screen time than what previous generations have had prior to them. And we're seeing the effects of that now. But we can be thoughtful as educators. We can be deliberate as educators in the way that we construct the learning environment that our students are in. We can be deliberate in terms of, if we're going to have phones or even allow phones in the classroom, we only bring them out when we need to bring them out. This is not a free reign situation where students are going to be sitting in a classroom staring at their phones incessantly. In fact, I would argue that the purpose of a short form video would be just for that moment in time where it's most relevant. It's a time where you use it for a deliberate purpose. You use it to enhance a specific aspect of your lesson plan, and then you have kids put the phone away, or you show that video on the large screen for the entire class to critique and break down and talk about. This is not a situation where kids come into class, they open up their phones, they open their apps, which are being designed by app companies to keep their eyeballs on the app for as much time as possible. This is not a situation where that's the learning environment that we're creating, at least not that I'm creating. I would argue we need to always have it goal-centered. We need to always keep it focused on our objectives for the classroom. And we need to look at it through the lens of how can this make the learning environment more of an active learning environment.
Adrian, I think the question I would take back to you from that, knowing that you don't think TikTok has a place in the classroom, period, would you concede that its deleterious effects, as you have already pointed out, could be somewhat ameliorated by the kinds of restraints that Phil is talking about, that there are ways to do it right and ways to do it wrong?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's just a given in terms of using tools correctly. I know for a fact that Phil isn't suggesting that kids need to be just staring into their phones incessantly during a class. That's not what he's talking about. I don't think anybody who's using TikTok in the classroom is doing that either. What worries me, though, is what we said earlier on about the gravitas. I mean, if you're concerned about kids' attention spans being eroded and now everything coming in 30-second snippets, I'm afraid that horse bolted many, many, many years ago. TikTok in the classroom in 2025, 26 isn't making any difference to that. Those kids are already way down that road. That's a problem which is, however that came about, that's already with us. What I think it goes back to the first thing I said. What I'm concerned about is that their association with TikTok is, whoever the current influencers are, and the kind of garbage material that these kids are watching all the time. And I think it's really difficult for an adolescent to make the distinction between the TikTok they're consuming 24/7. I know that's not literal, but it's something like that. And then TikTok being introduced in the classroom. I think that's a very subtle change and a very difficult thing for kids to grasp.
A little bit more on what can go wrong there. What are you saying can go wrong given that dynamic?
In the classroom?
Yeah.
Oh, I think there's just a lack of seriousness. I think the kids associate TikTok with a type of consumption of material that generally isn't the type of consumption that we're trying to get to in class.
So go a little deeper on what does a lack of seriousness feel like or look like, and what is the impact in the classroom? If you could be a little bit more visual about that.
Yeah, I think the kids think it's trivial, and they don't think it's important, and it's something to wash over them before the next thing comes along. And I think if you're trying to have a serious point made where there's some learning, it goes back to what I was saying. The learning only happens when there's absolute immersion in the material, and that needs to be repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated in many different ways. And I think it's a throwaway sort of, I know we're not talking about Snapchat, but the idea that Snapchat is there for, whatever, tiny period of time it is, and it's gone. And I think there is the potential for that with TikTok as well.
Phil? A lot there.
In terms of I think I'm going to address the lack of seriousness, because there is a flood of content that just, if you go on the TikTok app and you just scroll without any kind of direction, which is really what the app wants you to do, you will encounter exactly what Adrian is discussing. This ocean of content that is mindless in many ways, that is ineffective in terms of giving you anything other than a momentary hit of dopamine to kind of get you to scroll to the next video, to keep you engaged on the app until, oh, come on, give me a video, please, that at least shows me something interesting. If you look at a user using TikTok, you might see them scrolling for 10 to 15 videos before they actually find one where they sit on it. And part of the business model of TikTok is keeping users engaged in that manner. Part of it is also trying to serve them the content where they actually do watch it. And what I'm arguing for is not incessant scrolling, but I'm saying that you can take a concept in chemistry. Say you want to have a student create a video, and you want to have a student create a video that's under 60 seconds, and you want it on Le Chatelier's principle, this equilibrium idea in chemistry that's actually pretty complicated to explain. If you ask a student to create a video, and you say, okay, create a video, you're going to get exactly what you ask for, probably garbage. But if you say, okay, I want to have a storyboard of your idea, then I have a script that's going to go along with it, and I want to look at it first, so that they can go through this rigor that goes along with the actual video creation. So instead of just being a consumer passively of the content, they're actively engaging. And that's really how I have used TikTok in my classroom, as an active piece, much more than a consumers focused piece of content, which is probably how most people deal with TikTok. They consume rather than produce. And when they are producing, I agree with Adrian, they're probably not producing stuff that's of very high quality.
Phil, is your goal with TikTok among your students? I know that you have a vast audience out there, but among your students in the classroom, to look at some of your videos and other chemistry-related videos in the classroom, or is this to happen on their own time? So
I'll tell you the only ways that I've used TikTok in my classroom. I either use, if I find a video that is not mine, but it's something that I think is interesting and meets the course goals, I'll show it in class. And that goes for not just like TikTok, but sometimes on like YouTube Shorts or any of those similar platforms. You find a piece of content that is relevant and timely, and it's appropriate. And I use it as a way to kick off a discussion. I can also use TikTok as a way to or short form video formats as a way to convey lab procedures, getting kids to kind of visually see what they're going to be doing in the lab, which helps make their time in the lab more efficient. And for me, that's always been an issue, getting kids in the lab, knowing what to do, knowing how to be safe doing it. Social media is like short form videos can actually serve quite a valuable purpose in that regard, but that's not the kind of content that's going to go viral on TikTok. The other piece that I use TikTok for is for actual kind of a content creation piece as a formative assessment of sorts, where students have gone through a course, they've learned the content that I've attempted to teach them to the best of my ability, and now I want them to kind of take it on their own and explain it as if they had to be the teacher in their shoes. And I give them,
their grade is in addition to whatever they might do on an exam. Their grade is partially comprised of the work they do on putting together a TikTok video.
Yes. Now this is not.
Okay,
I want to take that thought back.
Take that over to Adrian. That there's the TikTok creation is actually part of a chemistry grade. What do you think of that? And being fair to what Phil's saying, he's saying that a well done video requires actually grasping the concepts, understanding the concepts, and being able to work with the concepts.
Oh, I think that's true. But I wonder about the content that actually comes out. I mean, I've never done that. Phil sounds like he's done that, and maybe the kids have produced some amazing stuff. I suspect, and I could well be wrong, and I'm happy to be corrected, that, the recording and the editing and the messing around with it, and it takes hours and hours. I'd imagine it's an extraordinarily inefficient way to do it. I mean, I don't know, but I would imagine that, something that can be explained relatively easily might take a kid 3 or 4 days to put together a video. I don't know. Maybe my perception, which I must admit is sort of based in ignorance somewhat, having never done it, is that would be an extraordinarily inefficient way to produce something or to get to a point which can be very simply reached in a different manner.
I mean, it absolutely does take a lot of time. Adrian's right. It takes a lot of time. And it has to be time that you're willing to give to that goal. And so again, you have to kind of ask yourself, in my classroom, does this work for me? If it doesn't, then you don't do it, right? If it's something that I can build in, and for me, it helps me to really know the ability of a student to kind of think deeply. And it's not the end product, because I don't think the end product would be something where someone would be like, oh my gosh, this is groundbreaking, because most of the chemistry that we're teaching in high school chemistry classes is, what you would encounter in maybe a undergraduate general chemistry course at any university across the United States.
This is really interesting, if I may, because it's not a gotcha, Phil. I was going to say the admission that this takes a lot of time. I don't mean it like that, but us agreeing that this takes an enormous amount of time, relatively, means probably, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that the amount of content you're going to be able to cover is going to be reduced. Now, that's a completely separate side issue, which has been going on for decades as well. And I don't want kids to miss out on content because they're learning how to edit video. That's a big no-no for me. I mean, Phil and I have a lot of common ground. This probably, this isn't as a contentious thing as maybe some people watching may think, but that is one contentious area for me. If content goes away, then I think we're in big trouble.
Do either of you have any studies you can refer to or data that you're aware of that support your position that learning with an integration of TikTok in the learning process is a positive or a negative? Or is it too early for that?
I think that if you go online and you look at like the National Institute of Health and some of the research that's been conducted recently about TikTok, you'll find some examples of studies where, like in an undergraduate program for nursing, they integrated TikTok videos with the singular goal of each video would produce one concept. And they rolled it out on this digital learning platform. And then they had assessments tied into the content that the user or the viewer had seen on TikTok, and then asked them how they felt in terms of engagement and in terms of what they learned from it, what they took away from it. And this is, again, just coming from the students' side, the undergraduate nursing students. They said with a high margin that it was helpful. They found themselves more engaged. They thought it was a good way to kind of learn a concept. They liked that they could go back and view it again. Other than that, I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done with it. I think anecdotally, if you were to ask people if they think that it's good, I mean, it's a lot like any other multimedia, right? Multimedia helps us because we learn better when information is presented in multiple modalities. So instead of just hearing something, now think about a typical video. on TikTok. Most videos now on TikTok are a person speaking or a scene being shown with captions underneath. So not only are we doing things that we know through educational research are effective, which means you have text, you have video, and you have all of it happening at once, because we can handle all of that content coming in at once. It makes the knowledge a bit stickier. So I'm not surprised that the research, at least right now, that I've seen, shows that it's beneficial. But again, you got to take it anecdotally because it's from the student's perspective.
Adrian, do you have countering data or studies?
I'm glad you used that word. Social science data and my data in the science world are two very different things, in my opinion. And an education professor once said to me, you have to become familiar with the research in education, because no matter what your position, you'll be able to find a paper to support it. So hashtag people are not electrons. So social science data, no thanks. But the answer to your question, John, the answer to your question is I do not have any.
Okay. Very current of you to use the term hashtag.
There you go. I thought you'd like that.
Now we're going to bring in some other voices, people who have been listening to the conversation and who are subject matter experts who think and write about these topics themselves all of the time. And first, I want to welcome Melv Lopez, who is the Vice President of Outreach and Engagement at Common Sense Media for Education. There, he leads nationwide efforts to help schools and families and communities navigate what we're talking about, technology, and also creating safer learning environments that are more impactful. So Merv, welcome to Open to Debate, and please come in with your question.
Hi, everyone. So great to be here. It's such a great debate going on. And so for me, as an educator in the classroom and working with educators around the country, so there's no doubt that video in the classroom, when used with strong pedagogical integration, is really incredibly helpful for learning. Does TikTok risk amplifying a culture of this short, fast, and highly polished learning experience, really kind of appealing in the moment, but potentially detrimental to the deep learning, foundational understanding, and long-term skill development? And I'm particularly interested in how does this even increase the pressure to create, learn, and engage in this way? And how does that impact how kids will navigate real life? Is it encouraging them to perform and influence versus just
Merv, I hear in your question some sense that you have concerns. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I have concern. I see the appeal. I've seen incredible video, and we've mentioned it. We've heard it mentioned here a little bit, right? You need some strong pedagogical implementation. You need to do it with real purpose, but you can do that with video, and you can do that in other form. I'm concerned that exposing our kids now in the classroom, where they're already spending so much time outside of the classroom, and upwards, up to 18 hours a day when you think about how they multitask through media and technology, we're just continuing to normalize and exacerbate their exposure to these platforms, and a platform especially like TikTok, where that algorithmic bias can really lead you.
Yeah. All right. Let's take that first to Adrian, who I think is somewhat in consonance with your point of view on that. But Adrian, what's your response to Merv's question?
Yeah, I think it goes back to immersion and the fact you have to have the struggle that I referred to earlier on. I mean, the only way you can understand anything is by failing at it first. So you've got to get in, get your hands dirty, fail to understand what's going on, revise your ideas and come back to it again and again and again. And short form video, whether we're talking about TikTok or anything else, presumably is not providing that in most cases. It's giving you a filtered, correct idea of, what this concept is. And I think, you're going straight to the end point, and without the journey through all the mess of getting it wrong and failing, I think that's very problematic, especially when you come to a situation where you're not going to be presented with that video. Solve this problem, work out this. Okay, now I've got to go through the process of actually getting things wrong and learning from that. And I think that's very problematic.
How is that different from having the teacher at the blackboard do that demonstration himself or herself as a first model, first example? Ultimately, that student who's sitting in the classroom watching the teacher at the blackboard is also going to have to be out there on his own, on her own, to make that decision. How is it different from being in the classroom for the demonstration and being looking at it on your phone?
Well, I think there's an expectation that TikTok, or learning in that way produces something immediately which is quote unquote perfect. And if the video has been edited and put together in such a way, then there's no opportunity within that video for, back and forth, pausing, body language, asking questions, and all of the normal interactions which go on in the classroom, which of course, we learned as if we didn't know via COVID that we lost. So that's really problematic. There's a human element to this, which we all know is there.
Phil?
If I could push back a little bit on this, I think that we're overlooking a couple of key ideas behind a value of something like short form videos on TikTok, which is that they can give us an avenue into things that are not easy to show and demonstrate in the classroom at all. And they also make better use of instructional time, because if you create a video on TikTok ahead of time, you can edit it for clarity, for brevity, and you can make it so that you can fit actually more content that you discuss into a normal classroom than you might otherwise be able to do. I myself, I love doing chemical demonstrations. I know how long it takes to set them up, to break them down if they don't work properly. And to the point of this sanitization of everything being correct, our labs that we have students do in most chemistry classrooms have been sanitized by companies that design lab activities. You're not going to have a student do a lab activity unless they're going to be able to get good results. Because if they don't get good results, then you're going to have to wrestle with, well, can we spend time talking about why their deviations from what I expected were so great? These kind of cookbook labs. And I don't think cookbook labs are any better for the average chemistry student than a TikTok video without any context or thoughtful use.
Okay. Emma, thank you very much for your question. We really appreciate it. Next, I'd like to welcome in Amanda Lenhart. Amanda is a senior fellow at the Joan Gans Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop. And Amanda, you've been studying how children and families use technology for more than 2 decades now, so you know a lot about this. And that includes 15 years, I understand, leading the work about young people and technology at the Pew Research Center. So thank you very much for listening in so far, and we're delighted to have you come in with your question. So please join us.
Great. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful debate. I'm really enjoying listening to it. And my question comes out of a space where I'm a researcher and I talk to kids and families all the time. And, one of the things I hear a lot is I hear all the enthusiasm from young people about TikTok in particular. And then I hear a lot of concerns from their parents about it. And we've touched on this already, the sort of challenges around, parental worries about social media. So I guess my question to both of you is really, can we take the social media aspect out of the equation, particularly when it comes to creating videos as a sort of a learning experience? Does it need to be on social media, or is there a way to get a benefit from the video and the short form video without it being connected to social media?
I love that question, especially for you, Phil, because you are somebody for whom the platform has drawn an enormous audience, and I think you have millions of views. And I think Amanda is suggesting, could you do these videos without putting them up online? So what's your response to that?
My response is absolutely, we can do that. Absolutely, you can do that, and you don't have to give up the benefits of a project that requires students to do the kind of high-level thinking, refinement, and planning that would go into a short-form piece of video content. You can definitely do that, and I've done that. And I know that is been kind of, you have a lot of students who, when you give them a project like this, where they're tasked with creating a video that has a certain number of goalposts that they have to meet along the way of its creation, and they're like, I don't have social media. My parents don't really want me to have this, that, or the other. And I'm like, that's fine. You can still create a video that meets that time limit, because the challenge really is the time limit. How do you communicate what you're trying to say to the audience that it's focused towards in the time limit that I'm giving you? So really, there's no need to put it on social media. However, there is a large desire by most high school students, that's kind of the group that I've been teaching for 25 years, to see how other people respond, kind of like the digital community, to the work that they've done. There is a lot of value that is placed on a like, on a repost, on a comment, on the number of views that a piece of content might make, that I think for people from my generation might be like, I don't understand what that feels like. But for them, it's very visceral and it's very real. So there can be a big pressure to kind of create content. And I think to some of the points that Adrian brought up before, like this idea that it's lacking in rigor, that might be the consequence of people just trying to put content out there and seeing what sticks and gets them the most attention. It's definitely a downside, but you can absolutely do content like this and meet good educational objectives without posting it at all on TikTok.
Would that make you feel better about this whole conversation, about this whole vehicle? I'll put it that way, Adrian. If it wasn't about putting it online and reaching an audience of millions and going for the likes and all of that, but just the alternative to writing a paper on a topic, for example, just to make a video about it.
Well, I mean, I think the best way to answer that is that I use video clips in my teaching occasionally. Now, it isn't via TikTok, but if there's some, a great explanation, or as Phil has said several times, a demonstration that works very well, the video is a tool which is absolutely appropriate and can be engaging, despite my protestations about some of that. But it's great, and I use it, and I will continue to use it. I think the question is really interesting, and this is sort of at the essence, or one of the real main planks of my concern, is the idea that this is a trivial thing, as Phil says, 4 likes, and what we're talking about here is not the content. We're talking about the social media aspect of it. And I think that really, my first point today was this idea of a lack of gravitas. And I think that's a real problem. I think, kids are going to be saying, let's say this happens in the classroom, they see one another's videos, the kids are going to be saying, wow, you got 400 likes or 7,000 views. They're not going to say, oh my gosh, that explanation of Le Chatelier's principle was amazing, and now I understand it. I mean, it's just not going to work that way, I think. Phil may have a different experience.
Amanda, it is an interesting question. I'm curious, have you been studying that issue of, taking the social media aspect out of the experience of content creation in a way that this, I made little films and videos in high school for classes using silent movies, frankly. But this generation TikTok is their way. The platform is there. The tools are in the platform. Have you been looking about taking that platform away and still doing video content?
Well, it really comes from just an acknowledgement of the broader conversation that we're having now around pulling phones out of schools, that we're seeing sort of sweeping around different school districts. And, a lot of parental concerns that I think actually allied social media with phone use. And we know that you don't actually have to use social media on a phone. And so part of my question is about, can we take the good? Can we find the things that are pedagogically powerful, engaging, and that actually, enhance learning with taking away some of the things that we maybe have more concerns about, or that parents have concerns about and may wish to opt their child out of, for instance. So that's really where a lot of this is coming from. It's like, how do we, thinking about this, and it comes from conversations, particularly with adolescents, some of whom are quite concerned about their social media use and want to try to reduce it. And so how do we even help those young people think about doing their schoolwork and being engaged without having to engage with something that they are concerned about?
All right. Well, thank you not just for your question, but for that insight. We really appreciate your being with us. I now want to welcome Michael Caulfield, who is an information literacy researcher and also co-author of Verified: How to Think Straight, Get Duped Less, and Make Better Decisions About What to Believe Online. Michael, thanks so much for listening into the conversation, and please come in with your question for our debaters.
Yeah, sure. My question is, a lot of the conversation today has been about whether we should produce good content and share good content online. Do we have, though, also a responsibility to bring in some of the bad content from TikTok, some of the poor treatments of science, some of the stuff that you see out there that engages with bad science, various conspiracies, and so forth, to show students that stuff and show them how they can analyze it, how they can critique it, how they can find better information. And if we don't do that, if we don't bring some of that into the classroom in a controlled environment to show students how to address it, are we kind of undermining our pedagogical aims, because we have them for a very short period of time, but TikTok has them for a much longer period of time, long after they leave the classroom. And a lot of the stuff that we're trying to inculcate in the students can be undone if we don't give them those skills to be able to analyze those sorts of things that come across their feeds.
Can you take that question on first, Phil?
Sure, happy to. So my initial response to your question is absolutely, it's something that we should do. I don't have any firsthand evidence because it's not something that I've done with my students. Aside from, there have been kind of side conversations where a student will come in and they'll show me a video. And the one that comes to mind when you were describing your question was, there's a lot of content on TikTok where you see people taking what looks like a bottle of Coca-Cola and dumping in a white powder. And then all of a sudden it's like foaming all over the place. And real Coca-Cola would not react in that way. So it has been an avenue to have that conversation. I've not been strategic about integrating it into the courses that I've taught in the past. Not that I couldn't do it or that you couldn't challenge students to say, hey, find a video that you're not sure if it's actually valid or not, especially with the rise of AI generated video content. I think this is going to become an increasingly important thing for students to be able to, and actually the general population, to wrestle with and identify and be able to be critical thinkers. I know that Adrian and I both are as educators, want our students to be thinking critically about the world around them and how it works, and to be able to identify misinformation. And that's not something that I've currently done with kind of bad videos on TikTok yet, aside from the anecdotal students bringing in videos just to ask questions about it.
Adrian, what's your take on that question?
I think it's an excellent question, and I think it's really important, and I think it's something that we should be doing, but I have a short, rather cynical conclusion. I think that we can do that, and the kids won't care. I think there's a lack of interest in really understanding that. And it goes back to what I was saying about kids ultimately becoming voters in the electorate who are going to vote on things that they don't care if they know something else about that. So I'm not, if they know something is wrong, and I think there's a really oversimplified idea that teachers have more influence than they actually have in this field. And my experience has been that, I can tell the kids things which I know to be true until I'm blue in the face for years on end, and then they'll just ignore that and go and do something quite to the contrary. My experience has not been good in that regard. So I think I have to keep doing it, and I think we should be doing it, but its effectiveness, I think I found to be very minimal.
Michael, we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm wondering, have you thought about an implementation of that sort of corrective teaching? A portion once a week of a chemistry class, which, there's so little time to teach anyway, but set aside a little bit of time for that. What's your vision of how that would work?
Yeah, sure. A lot of my work is actually designing modules in K-12, primarily middle school and high school, in first-year college education that's specifically on that. But often the problem is it falls to librarians, right? And so librarians will do the entire InfoLit sequence. And what we've really been dying to happen is for it to transfer into the disciplines, because ultimately, our belief is that librarians are great. I love librarians, but they can only do so much with these sort of general skills. We really need, if we're going to address this stuff, we really need people from all the disciplines to incorporate a little bit of this in their class. And I think there are ways, and I think we've developed ways that our research shows are very effective. But to the point, both participants have made here, a big challenge is just time. The curriculum is already so filled, and I think our perspective is most teachers want to do this, but it's hard to carve out the time.
Well, you brought us to an interesting place in the conversation that we have to wrap up now, Michael, but I thank you very much for joining us. But this is the time to bring this debate home with closing remarks. Phil, you are up first with your closing remark. One last time, why you believe TikTok is enhancing the teaching profession. So
I thought I'd end with a little story that was very telling for me about the effectiveness of social media in general and its utility. And this is a project that I did with my advanced placement chemistry students after they had already taken the exam. It's a notoriously a difficult time for students to maintain their their zeal for learning in the classroom because they've taken the test, right? All of those goalposts that we had set and worked so hard toward had been met. But I told them we're going to do a video project, and you have the freedom to be able to choose whatever concept you'd like, something that you found interesting when we were learning about it the first time. And I want you to make a video about it. It has to be 60 seconds or less. You have to make it geared towards an audience of non-scientists. So they had to kind of filter it through. And so I saw all of my students do this. And the assessment piece for me was they had to first present it to their peers. So the whole class watched everyone else's videos. Then I brought in teachers and administrators from my school for the final piece. So they got a round of feedback from their peers and me, and then they got to revise and then show their final product. It was amazing how many big deer in headlight eyes I saw when they saw each other's content. And the takeaway from it is this: if we're concerned with rigor, were they communicating relatively straightforward chemistry concepts? Yes. But the challenge and the rigor for me in that particular process came through in what they had to do. They had to storyboard. They had to come up with a way to communicate to relative non-scientists that complex topic that they chose. They had to show it visually, and they had to keep it concise, under 60 seconds. And that ability to kind of actively engage in the process of creation had some interesting things where you saw students fail and then formatively come up with a solution to it. So for me, I think that it's something that I'll continue to do. I think it's been highly effective. If I had more time, I'd go into this specific example, but I see I'm running out of my 2 minutes.
Adrian, you get the last word here in our debate. Again, this is your last chance to convince us why TikTok is eroding the teaching profession.
So, again, anecdotally, just as Phil was giving giving us the benefit of his experience in a positive way, I think the overarching anecdote that I will tell you, and this may be surprising to some people, maybe it isn't. There are a lot of kids who don't want new technology or new ideas or constantly having innovation in the classroom. A lot of kids that I teach often say to me, we like what you do because you're delivering the material, we know what it is, there's no ambiguity, and it's really simple and straightforward. We're not engaged in projects that we have no interest in doing. For example, I have no interest, if I'm in a chemistry class, to be editing and learning about video editing and creating a whole bunch of content. I'm actually interested in the chemistry. And I think there's a lot of kids out there who are craving that kind of traditional approach. And anecdotally, I find that to be true amongst a lot of kids who are serious about learning. Now, some of the kids who perhaps don't find school quite so stimulating, sure, they're going to be very interested in doing what I loosely call projects, which I think are going to allow them to, possibly not engage with the material. And, there's maybe a debate as to whether they should be even studying chemistry. Maybe those kids should actually be doing something which they find more interesting. But I think from a chemistry point of view, the content is king, and that really worries me about what's going on with social media in general, and TikTok in particular.
Thank you, Adrian. And that is a wrap on this debate. So I'd like to thank both of you, Phil and Adrian, for taking part in this conversation, for disagreeing with each other with such mutual respect and civility. But it was clear you're on opposite sides of this divide. And you made it very, very interesting. And even more interesting were the questions that came from our thoughtful questioners. So thank you, Merv and Amanda and Michael. And finally, a big thank you to our audience for tuning into this episode of Open to Debate, our Back to School special. I want to point out that we are, as you know, a nonprofit working to combat extreme polarization through what you just heard, civil debate. And our work is made possible by listeners like you, by the Rosencrantz Foundation, and by supporters of Open to Debate. Robert Rosencrantz is our chairman. Our CEO is Clea Connor. Leah Matthau is our chief content officer. Elizabeth Kitzenberg is our chief advancement officer. Andrew Lipson is head of production. Michelle Debrasini is our director of marketing. This episode was produced by Alexis Pangrazi and Marlette Sandoval. Editorial and research by Gabriella Mayer. Max Fulton and Julia Sirkin provided production support. The Open to Debate team also includes Gabrielle Iannicelli, Rachel Kemp, Eric Gross, Linda Lee, Katy Perry, and Tom Bunting. Damon Whittemore mixed this episode. Our theme music is by Alex Clement, and I'm John Donvan. We'll see you next time on Open to Debate.